All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. It's the day after State of Origin, Martyn. We've deliberately delayed the podcast so we can give our fresh reactions to the match. What did you make of yesterday's game?
Oh, I thought it was incredible, Jake. Great to be with you again, as always. I thought it was one of the most incredible Origin games I've ever seen. And in fact, we ought to sort of reveal to the audience, didn't we, that we originally intended to do this podcast immediately after the Origin game, but I think we were both too emotionally exhausted to do it yesterday. We probably needed to, go to bed and sleep on it for 24 hours before we tried to sort of put our thoughts together on that incredible game. The first time Queensland have ever won in Perth, I think I'm right in saying, aren't I? Which is an incredible thing in itself. It's funny that New South Wales always seem to win in Perth, and they very nearly did do yesterday. And I thought the final 10 minutes. I'm a great Queensland fan, as I've said before on this podcast, which goes back to the days of Wally Lewis when Wally played for Wakefield. He converted me into a Queensland fan as well as a Wakefield fan back in the 1980s, and the final 10 minutes were really stressful. Actually, if you wanted Queensland to win, I was almost convinced that New South Wales were going to do it, and they scored 5 tries to 4, didn't they? So it was only goal kicking really that did it for Queensland, and my goodness, 26-6 at half-time, 26-24 at full-time, 4 Blues tries in the second half. It was quite incredible, and played in the most appalling weather. If anybody didn't believe in global warming, if or climate change, if you watch the Australian season this year, Jake, it seems to be rain every bloody week. Unfortunately.
I'm convinced I brought it back with me.
Yeah, and we're having a heat wave and drought in England. I think the climate is transferring from Australia to England at the moment, mate. And it's amazing. But the conditions were incredibly testing. The crowd, 57,000 in Perth, which was a great figure in appalling weather. It looked great on TV, but. When and New South Wales scored, everybody thought that the Blues were the favourites, didn't they? Everybody thought they'd win. And what did you think when they scored the first try? I mean, gosh, as a Queenslander, Jake, you must have thought, oh well, it's going to be their night, but it wasn't. Brian scored that first try for just 6 minutes.
No, I like the way that Queensland started. It looked like they had a lot more energy, a lot more intent in their line speed. But I think it might have had an error. They got another 6 again, and they were just attacking our try line. You could see they were just sort of building momentum slowly. And then, when they crossed that first try, I just thought, oh no, the floodgates are about to open. And luckily Queensland were able to wrestle back some of that momentum. I know a lot's been made of the unfair penalty count in the first half.
8-0 in the first half, yeah.
Yeah, the Blues fans aren't too happy about it. But I was thinking about it, Martyn, I look at a lot of those penalties and, it's not like a lot of them were 50-50s. You've got the elbow from Zach Lomax into the head of one of our defenders. That's obviously a clear penalty. There was the eye gouge from Jarome Luai. That's obviously a penalty.
Although not an eye gouge, as it's turned out.
No, just a bit of a facial massage, I think. He's probably arguing. They had a number of penalties for being offside. There was the penalty given for the obstruction that Utoikamanu gave away. So they're all, in my mind...
disallowed try.
Yeah, and in my mind, they're all fair penalties. They're penalties every day of the week.
There was no penalty given that I would have disputed personally, and if the Blues were moaning about it in the first half, the solution was in their own hands. Stop giving them away.
And that's what we saw in the second half. They became more disciplined. they put their heads down, stuck to their game plan, and they put 4 tries on Queensland. So it's a simple fix for them. Stay disciplined, play to your game plan, don't give away silly penalties, and they should be right in it come the end of the contest. But I just like the way Queensland just kept their foot on the throat. They kept rolling through New South Wales middles. I thought Tom Dearden was very active around the ruck.
It's interesting, isn't it? There were some key selections made, wasn't there, by Billy Slater, and one of them was Tom Dearden replacing Daly Cherry Evans, and you've got to say that worked, didn't it? Tom Dearden is a player with a ton of energy. He's all over the park. He's after the ball all the time. I really like him as a player. I really like him, and I like Daly Cherry Evans as well. But I think, at the age of 36, time has probably finally caught up with Daly Cherry Evans as a Queensland player, and it's the future lies with Tom Dearden, and he showed that, particularly in the first half, in my opinion. I thought he caused New South Wales loads of problems, and was a brilliant partner for Cameron Munster. So it just worked like an absolute treat in the first half.
Yeah, absolutely. And I especially enjoyed that try where Queensland got a little bit of a roll on. They were attacking the line, and then it was when Kearnan got that quick ball to Kurt Capewell, and he sort of popped up out of nowhere and scored. But then they showed that camera angle from behind the ruck where Kearnan was sort of at first receiver, and then Tom Dearden sprinted around and sort of just pushed him off to the side, and then gave him that nice little short ball. It's pleasing to see that he has that vision. Just lucky that it came off. But
absolutely,
I think they played a close to near perfect first half. I was just a little bit disappointed come the second half when they came out, and it just looked like were playing to secure the win. They took their foot off the pedal a little bit, and then
the
momentum swung
I
towards
think the Blues came out really highly motivated. You almost suspect that the Blues may have been a little bit complacent before the game started, and also I think they were hampered by Nathan Cleary. He clearly had a groin problem, didn't he? Something that I think that the day before the game in training, I think he just tweaked a groin strain and came out with a bandage on his upper thigh. So there was clearly something not right about Nathan, and it was interesting that he didn't take on the kicking duties. Zach Lomax took those on for goal kicking, and if Nathan had done it, if Nathan had been fully fit, it might have been a different story. You never know, do you?
Yeah, that's it. And I don't know, it felt like Luai was steering that team around the park, wasn't he? And I think even a few of his kicks were wayward, and then the ones that Cleary did kick, he missed, didn't strike him correctly as well. So he was definitely hampered, and that's a question that's been asked today in the media: is did Laurie Daly make a bad decision in selecting Cleary? Should he have looked to maybe Matt Burton, bringing him into the team and sitting Cleary out?
It's difficult to drop Nathan Cleary, though, isn't it? Even when he's not absolutely 100%, he's such a great player and so influential that you just would be reluctant to drop him. And then, of course, if he had dropped him and they'd lost it, all hell would have broken loose, wouldn't it, on Laurie? Yeah,
absolutely. But all in all, mate, I think what I'll do is I'll have a look at the text messages we sent each other at half time. It's almost like we called it.
Yeah.
What did you say? You messaged me and said, "You must be feeling optimistic," and I replied, "Slightly. Still nervous though. Momentum swings too easily these days." And lo and behold, we got a text back from you, 20 minutes later, and you said, "What are we watching?" And at that point I thought we're going to lose this game, and I had the sweatiest palms for that last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It was very, if you're a Blues fan, God, they must have been, enjoying it. But as a Queensland fan, it was a nightmare.
Yeah. One guy, by the way, who you've already mentioned, who I thought had a really great game for Queensland, was Kurt Capewell, who, I don't think he played in the first game, did he, if I remember rightly?
No.
but he was another great selection picked by Billy Slater, and I thought he was absolutely outstanding. Obviously, he scored a try, that the one that you've just talked about, but he actually, I thought, looked terrific for the whole game in the pack, and was one of the major reasons why the Queensland pack, which was actually beaten quite convincingly in the first game in Brisbane, stood up a hell of a lot better this time against a pretty fearsome New South Wales six, and it really builds up the last game so well, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure, mate. And that was one of the big things I was kind of critical a little bit about when we're going into game two, because it looked like Billy had opted to go with Carrigan on the bench, Nanai on the bench, obviously Kearnan coming off the bench, and you can see he was trying to match that impact that the Blues had, but it just made me question whether we still had the firepower on the field to start the match. But I think we're all proven wrong. I think when Carrigan came on, he made such an impact. Kearnan, we've touched on, he made a great impact, and yeah, I think that's the recipe Billy Slater will probably go with for game three.
I would think so.
I think Loiero at 13, he surprised me as well. I thought he was solid. They had the Blues defenders had a tough time trying to get him to the ground and get him onto his back. He was good for a quick play of the ball. But yeah, all in all, and I'm very happy for Harry Grant. There was a lot made of his winning record as a starting hooker for Queensland. He hasn't won, I don't know if he'd won a match in the starting position, but we all know the quality player he is, but just good for him to get the monkey off his back.
He played extremely well, didn't he? There's no doubt about it.
No, most definitely. But who was your player of the match, mate? Obviously, there was the Channel 9 player of the match was Cam Munster. Would you agree with that decision?
Well, I thought Cam Munster captained the side really well, a lot better than I wasn't quite sure about him being the captain, but I think all those doubts have been expunged now. And I also thought Tom Dearden played well. But as I say, I thought Kurt Capewell was outstanding for the for Queensland as well. So but obviously Brian Toto, what a great winger. You always say sometimes a winger just depends on the service that he gets. But what a great finisher Brian Toto is, and one or two of those tries did demand strong finishing. The way he just ducked under and stepped inside the defence and so on. That's real class. And for a guy to score a hat-trick and still finish on the losing side is quite an unusual thing, I think. So, I think the Blues will be back. Stephen Crichton, he scored a great try as well, didn't he? As the Blues were fighting back. It's going to be a big job for Queensland to win that final game, mate. It really is. It's not, but I'm delighted they're going into it at 1-1.
Yeah, no, for sure, mate. Because there's nothing worse than if you're on the losing side of a dead rubber, I guess. So if the Blues were to win the first two games, going into that third match, as a Blues fan, you're kind of like, we've already got the series wrapped up. As a Queensland fan, you're really hoping that it's not going to be a whitewash, but it's so exciting when it's going to be a decider.
Oh gosh, yes.
I know the NRL.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, mate. So I know the NRL. They'll be very pleased that it's going to a decider. I'm sure that the ratings will skyrocket and there'll be a full crowd at Sydney. So who knows, mate? I might have to try and see if I can hitchhike my way down to Sydney and grab some tickets for the game.
Absolutely. Well, the viewing figures were great again, weren't they? On Channel 9, I think the total audience was about 3.75 million, which emulated the first game as well. And I'd be very surprised if the final game didn't get more than 4 million viewers nationwide watching it. And interestingly, there were 190,000 people in Perth who tuned into the Channel 9 coverage as well, which was probably the biggest audience they've ever had, the biggest TV audience in Perth they've ever had for a rugby league game, I would think. And it sort of anticipates nicely the new club coming into the NRL from Perth in 2027, although you've probably seen there's been a lot of controversy about the way that the West Australian newspaper gave very little coverage to the Origin game, because it's owned by Gerard Stokes and his company that owns Channel 7 in Australia, which broadcasts AFL, the Aussie Rules game. And they seemed determined to try and pour cold water on the idea of Perth having an NRL side. They're very antagonistic, aren't they, to to the whole rugby league venture into Perth, and that they gave the Origin game virtually no publicity whatsoever, which was quite amazing, really, given the size of the crowd and the quality of the event that was on offer.
Yeah, it's disappointing. Probably not surprising. I think it probably just amplifies the fact that they really need that Perth team to have some success in the early years. I think the NRL should be doing everything they can to try and aid that and assist that. And that's why I guess the Storm have been so successful in Melbourne, because they've had what feels like 2 decades of success down there.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's helpful that it sounds like the WA politicians are right behind the Perth Bears team. And if we can keep them on our side, even better. But yeah, there's going to be some sports politics with the AFL side there. But I mean, I think Wednesday proved that there's an appetite for it over there. And Mal Meninga was there doing the post-match interviews, talking about which players in the match that he would like to sign for the Perth Bears. And he just said, give me any of them. I'll take any of them. So makes me wonder if any of the players that were over there were considering, hang on, I could probably live over here. So,
I certainly could do. I mean, having been to Perth, it's a great city and a beautiful climate, although not so good on Wednesday night. But if I were a young guy thinking about emigrating from England, Perth would be high on the list of possible alternatives. Particularly now they've got an NRL side on the horizon.
Oh, absolutely, mate. One of the other things, I was just sort of looking through Twitter today, there was a bit of discussion around Origin. If they were to take it overseas, could we see an Origin game come over to the UK? Where would they hold it? Would they be able to sell it out? If they were to hold it at Wembley, what type of crowd would they get? Do you think if they were to bring an Origin game over and play it at, say, Wembley, they'd get a decent crowd?
Well, it depends. They'd probably get a decent crowd. I'm not sure whether they'd sell it out. But the problem is that the time scale is so different. The great thing about playing in Perth, of course, is that you can play it at a kick-off time that's really suitable for the east coast of Australia. But if you play a State of Origin game in England, bear in mind that we're 9 hours behind you. So, for a game to be broadcast at 8 o'clock at night in Sydney and Brisbane, you'd be kicking off at 11 o'clock in the morning in England. And I just don't think that's, with the best will in the world, I think that would be incredibly difficult, to be honest. Yeah. And it'd probably be easier to play a game in the United States, probably in California or somewhere, as they once did, of course, in Long Beach. But I just think the time difference just doesn't make it viable in terms of coming to England. I'd be very surprised if they didn't play a State of Origin in Auckland at some stage soon. I don't know whether they've already got one scheduled for Auckland. And I do think it's a great idea to take the an Origin game, one in Sydney, one in Brisbane, and then one to a major city elsewhere. But it's got to be. I think it's got to be within a time range that allows the game to be broadcast in Sydney and Brisbane at a peak time, so that it gets a peak audience. Not much point in, if we kicked off at 7:30 p.m. in England, it would be I think 4:30 in the morning in Australia. Which just wouldn't be the right time, would it really?
Oh, mate, yeah. I mean, you'd almost be better off having a night out and then staying awake into the early hours of the morning, continue, drinking at the bar, and hopefully you might catch the start. But yeah, I think you're right. The broadcast deal has a lot to do with it. They get to sort of dictate what time it starts and when's the best time for their commercials to run. So
Oh,
that's
yeah,
why we
yeah.
often see the 8 p.m. kickoff on a Wednesday night, because everyone's at home. There's not much they can do, so they put on the Origin, and that's why they get such big figures. Aside from the fact it's a great contest, obviously.
Yeah.
But just back to the squads themselves, mate. Obviously, Mitch Moses missed game 2 with his, I think he had a calf strain. Jarome Luai came in. Do you think Luai's, well, first of all, what do you make of his performance? And second of all, do you think he's done enough to retain his
Well,
spot for
he
game
did kick
3?
out early on the full, didn't he? That was a mistake. But I thought apart from that, I thought he played pretty well. And as you say, because Nathan Cleary was just carrying a groin strain, I think Luai was probably more prominent than he might otherwise have been. And they have a great partnership from the time at Penrith. So I wouldn't be surprised if Laurie Daly sticks with that combination. And of course, it depends partly on how serious Mitchell Moses' calf strain is. I'm not obviously familiar with it, but I think it's a great choice to have a choice between Mitchell Moses and Jarome Luai. If I were a coach, it would be a dilemma I'd be delighted to have. Put it that way.
Oh, absolutely, mate. Yeah, it's almost like the sport for choice, the Blues. I think we might have mentioned it before on the podcast that if you took, all the pool of New South Wales talent and you picked a B side, the second best player in every position, it would still be a competitive team, I think, and
God, yeah,
would push Queensland a long way. So
yeah.
They're very, very lucky. On Queensland's side, I don't know if Billy will make many changes. I've been advocating for Corey Horsburgh to come into the squad and get a match at some point.
It was in the squad, but not in the 17 or not in the 18 that were finally selected. But yeah, I think he'd have a big contribution to make.
No, definitely. All right, mate. Anything else Origin related you want to touch on before we move on to some other stuff?
No, I don't think so. The only thing I'd probably say about it is that it's great to sort of anticipate that the Perth Bears coming to Perth, and from an English point of view, if you want to go and jump on a plane and watch an NRL game, as I think I've said before, Perth will be a great option because it's a lot shorter journey to get from England to Perth than it is, at the other side of Australia to Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne. So hopefully I'll get over to Perth at some stage and see a Perth game, maybe even the opening game when they make their debut in 2027. I'd very much look forward to that, and it will be interesting to see if they use the same stadium, the Optus Stadium, to make it a real big event when they debut.
Yeah. I'd love to know what kind of ticket sales they generate for that. Depends on who they sign, I guess, and how competitive their team looks. But I'm sure they'll get a good turnout.
Absolutely. I still think they'll get I think they'll get quite a few players from England going over.
Yeah.
In Perth.
Well, hopefully they don't, gut too many teams over there and steal all the good players, mate. Hopefully it's just a couple. All right, mate. Well, let's look at some of the things you touched in your column this week. First one was, is Sean watching? Jake Connor's form. He's been playing sensational this season, and you have to think he's knocking on that Ashes squad side, right?
Well, he's leading the Albert Goldthorpe medal table. He's leading the Man of Steel medal table. So he must be doing something right. A few weeks ago, John Wilkin sort of spoke out and said, well, is Jake Connor really the best player in the game? Should he really be leading the Man of Steel table? But the fact is, since he said that, it actually, if anything, seems to have spurred Jake Connor on to play even better. And you've got to say that against Warrington, when he was up against George Williams, I thought Jake Connor dominated the game, and he is Brad Arthur seems to have got those niggly bits of Jake Connor out of his game for the most part. Connor has always let himself down by being too emotional, arguing with referees, niggling opponents, and so on, not focusing purely on playing the game, if you see what I mean. But now it's a different Jake Connor, and I think he is getting very near to being a selection for England. The fact is, who would he play alongside? I can't imagine that he would replace George Williams, but would he play alongside him? Who knows? It's interesting, and of course there are plenty of other candidates as well. So it's an interesting one for Shaun Wane. Obviously, I don't know what Shaun's thinking is on this. He may not watch the game in the same way that I do. Well, of course he won't, because he's the England coach and he's got to live or die by his selections when he eventually makes them. So I don't know what his position will be, but I just think that Jake Connor has got to come into very strong consideration now.
No, I agree, mate. Let's see if he can continue this form. I'm sure if they have a strong run into the playoffs and he has a solid playoffs campaign, it'd be hard to deny him a spot in that squad. Well,
it could take them all the way to the grand final, and that would make it even more difficult to deny him.
Now, I was going to go to another question. Off the back of that, any word on when Wayne's looking at releasing his preliminary Ashes squad?
I've not heard anything yet. I hope he, we need to keep letting news out, don't we, to try and fill Wembley Stadium on October the 25th. And I would very much like to see Shaun name a squad in the near future. A 30-man squad perhaps, obviously to be slimmed down, but we need those talking points, mate. We need to know. I mean, we've just been talking about Jake Connor. If Shaun were to release a 30-man squad, would Jake Connor be in it? Well, that would be a fantastic talking point to start with, wouldn't it? And it would generate loads of debate, either pro or against, because there are still quite a lot of rugby league people in England who think Jake Connor shouldn't be selected for England, and it is an incredibly strong debating point, and everybody's entitled to their views, including me and you, and I just think it's fascinating, and we need to encourage Shaun, hopefully, to start thinking about naming a squad soon, because I think it would give a real stimulus to ticket sales for that Wembley game.
Yeah, because he has done that in the past, hasn't he? I guess it would just be hard if you picked like a 30-man squad and then all of a sudden, someone played the house down for the rest of the season outside of that squad. But there's no reason why you couldn't still bring them in.
You could always bring them in. Yeah, I'd be delighted. I mean, the other thing that you've got to say, who's going to play full back if Jack Welsby doesn't recover from his injury problems at the moment? Jack is out for a long time, and there are quite a lot of. Well, we've got to think about who the contenders will be to play at full back if he's not there. One of them, of course, could be Jake Connor, because he alternates between full back and the half back positions. But who else has impressed sufficiently? I think there are one or two contenders. AJ Brimson, of course, from the Gold Coast Titans. He's now thrown his lot firmly in with England, and he's given up on Queensland, which is quite amazing, I think. And I mean, he had a very good game at the weekend, didn't he? I think the Gold Coast had a good victory against, who the heck were they playing? Oh, Manly, I think they were playing, weren't they? And AJ Brimson, I've got a very high regard for his ability, so he's won. Max Jowett of Wakefield. Are Wakefield going to get any players in the England squad? Max Jowett, who's an old Albert Goldthorpe Rookie of the Year medal winner from a few years ago, he's playing extremely well for Wakefield. Jack Broadbent playing well at the moment for Hull KR, although he'll probably play at centre for them when much of the time. But he's a very reliable utility player. So there are loads of potential players who could potentially come in and play in those in that position.
Yeah, no, for sure, mate. It'll be interesting to see. They could even look at playing Mikey Lewis at fullback if they can't find a spot for him and they don't, want to have him sit in the 14 role on the bench like he's done it before for the Rovers.
Yeah.
Well, it might be something Wayne looks at.
Yes, although I'm not a great fan of playing players out of position. Away from the position they normally play. I think you're potentially asking for trouble by doing that. So, and again, I'm not quite sure what Sean's view of that is, but I suspect that he would prefer to play players in their, established positions rather than experimenting by putting them in new positions, particularly to play against the Aussies, who will exploit any weakness absolutely mercilessly if they identify it.
Wonder how far off Jay Field is being able to apply for citizenship over there.
I don't know, but Woody,
I better try and twist his arm.
He's a great player, but he always strikes me as a true blue Aussie. I just can't see him wanting to play for England on a residential qualification, and quite frankly, I'm not sure I'd want him to. He's as you might say in Australia, a fair dinkum Aussie, and I just, I don't think. I mean, AJ Brimson has actually made a very firm commitment to playing for England because of his mother being English, and he's turned his back on Queensland, which is a really big thing. So, you can see a commitment there that I think says quite a lot, really.
Definitely, mate. Now, you also did a nice little piece on Sir Billy Boston.
We talked about Billy last week, which had only just come out when we did the podcast, so we weren't absolutely sure about how it had come about and so on. But yes, I told a little story about Billy when I was a kid. Did you read that bit?
Yeah. But he gave you a wink. What were you giving him the fist or something, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I used to live in this small town called Horbury, which was between Huddersfield and Wakefield. And in those days, it was before the M62 had been built. And every team that was coming to play in Wakefield from Lancashire had to drive through this small town Horbury. And it was a bit of a real place where the traffic had to crawl its way through the main street. And so we always knew that if a team was visiting, we'd see them, a couple of hours before kick-off time, coming down the street in the club coach. So there are a few kids, myself included, who used to hang about. We were only about 8 or 9, very young. But we used to hang about, and when we saw them coming, we'd try and, we're going to kill you and all this sort of stuff. And I on that particular day, yelled to Eric Ashton and Billy Boston, Neil Fox will kill you. And Billy just sort of waved to me like this and smiled and winked at me. And, we'd been thinking we were trying to scare them. And obviously we didn't. And it was just such a nice guy. And from that point onwards, I used to tell the story. Billy Boston actually waved at me and winked at me, and it made me feel actually quite proud as a little kid. So from that point on, I was a great fan of his. But I would have been an even bigger fan, mate, if he'd played for Wakefield.
I bet.
In those days, I'm an avid Wakefield fan.
So there's only like a few players out there in history where you hate to see them absolutely smash your side, but you've just still got so much respect for them. Like
so much admiration.
It's hard to hate them. Yeah. But that's a great story, mate. I was sort of just reading through, and then you posed the question. It was one of the readers' poll questions. Who should be the next knight from the rugby league community? Who would your suggestions be for that one, mate? And who do you think the popular vote would be?
Well, I think Neil Fox. I'm slightly biased because of my Wakefield connections, but Neil Fox is the record point scorer in Rugby League and is an absolute gentleman. he was my idol as a child, and we used to have an expression in our house. My dad, I mean, I became a Wakefield fan because my dad was a Wakefield fan who went back many years, and but we always used to call Neil the big fella because he was a big fella. And my dad and his brother, my uncle, we always used to go to the game together, and much of the conversation in the car would be, "What's the big fella going to do today?" And and as often as not, he did something really special. So I think Neil Fox, but I think the guy who will be the next Rugby League Knight will be Kevin Sinfield, who's a great player as well, obviously, led Leeds to so many incredible successes, was probably the best captain that we've ever had in the game, I think, in England at least, and has done this incredible work for the MND community alongside Rob Burrow when Rob was still alive, of course. And I think you'll find that in the readers' poll on our website, Kevin Sinfield is winning by a street as the next potential Rugby League Knight, and I've got no doubt that in the not too distant future, maybe in the New Year's honours list at the end of the year, start of next year, we'll find his name there, and that will obviously be thoroughly deserved, and a great honour. But it was wonderful to see Billy. I mean, Billy is 90 years old now. Is Billy? Obviously, it's incredible that he's reached that age. I'm so delighted, and I think of all the 1954 tourists, I don't think there's any other of that Great Britain squad that toured Australia who are still living. And my apologies to anybody who I perhaps have overlooked, but I don't think anybody is still alive apart from Billy. So it's a remarkable, because he went on that tour as a very young man. He'd only just signed. He actually went on that tour when he only played 6 games of rugby league. He was so good that after playing only 6 games, he was selected to tour. I mean, that's just says it all, doesn't it, really? And he was only probably about 20 years old, or 19 or 12. I think he was still only 19 when he went on tour. So, and now it's 71 years later, and he's 90 years old, and time's just gone so quickly, hasn't it? And but what an amazing man, and I think he must be one of the very few people in the country who's actually got 3 statues in different places. One in Cardiff, one at Wembley, and one in Wigan. I mean, that's absolutely amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unheard of, mate.
Who else has got 3 statues of themselves? Not just in rugby league, but in any sphere of life. It's quite amazing.
Well, that's right. I mean, you look at even in the NBA, like Michael Jordan has his bronze statue. He's only got one, I'm pretty sure. Wally the King, he's only got one at the front of Suncorp Stadium. Yeah. So, yeah, mate, not many have 2, let alone 3. So yeah, what an honour. But yeah, I probably agree. Kevin Sinfield, hope to see his name on that New Year's honours list.
Absolutely,
he's well deserved. But yeah, no, it's great to see, and hopefully many more rugby league players in years to come will get that honour. Move on to some of the other news, mate. We touched on this a few months ago, but we got some of the first visuals of the new rugby league game, the England version. It looks like Junior and Semba might be on the front cover. And
he'd be the obvious one, wouldn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and I can just double check. Was it Jodie Cunningham, maybe?
I think it was Jodie. Yeah. For the women's game.
As the women's player, but yeah, mate, that's exciting to see. I mean, for all the game fans out there, I know I have a PlayStation.
Are you a computer games player then, Jake?
I am. No, I don't play frequently, but I love a sports game. I love playing there's an NBA basketball match. I don't mind playing the Madden NFL games. They're good fun. But yeah, when I was a kid, I had like the original Xbox when it came out, and I remember when Rugby League 1 and Rugby League 2 came out. I think Steve Price was on the front cover for us in Australia, and I might have spoken to you about this before, but there was like a franchise mode you could play where essentially you were like the GM of the team, and you could offer players from different clubs contracts. And so I had the Broncos, and I was very quick to sign Greg Inglis and Jonathan Thurston and bring them to play for the Broncos. I even remember you could sign players from Super League as well. Back then I was always amazed by Rob Burrow, just because of how well he played for his size. Yeah. So I thought I'll go and sign Rob Burrow from the Leeds and put him in a Broncos jersey. So it brings back great memories, and I think I will invest in this new game, mate. It's a great way to grow the game.
Well, for the purpose of this podcast, we need you to, because I'm not a computer games player. Even a rugby league game on a computer is just probably not my thing, if I'm really honest about it. Maybe I'm just missing something. I'm just lacking something, maybe. So we need you to play it, mate, so that we can talk about it with any authority. So,
mate,
maybe we can claim it as an expense as well. Who knows?
Oh, mate, yeah.
Podcast.
Absolutely, and I'm sure if it's a work investment over here in Australia, you can sort of claim it on your tax as well as a tax deduction. So we might be able to tee up something there, but there could be I'm sure there's a way you could probably film some gameplay, maybe a little highlight of a try that I've scored with my player. So I might be able to put some gameplay vision on the podcast.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah,
yes.
Looking forward to seeing how you do.
Absolutely, mate. The other news, though, Will Price, mate, he's set to be on the sidelines for quite the stint. I think they were saying it was 8 to 10 weeks with his hamstring injury. Yeah. It's a big loss for Hull FC.
Oh, and they showed it last weekend when they lost at home to Castleford and he wasn't playing. I think he's very quickly become a very important part of their side, playing at fullback, and potentially he would have been a contender to replace Jack Wellesby if Jack weren't to recover for England, alongside
That's true.
some of the other guys we've mentioned. But very disappointing for Hull, and they'll miss him, I think, quite badly. And just checking who they play this weekend, because I think they're actually at Salford on Sunday, which is probably a pretty certain win for them. So they won't miss him too much on that particular day. But I'm really sorry that he's going to miss a significant part of the season.
Yeah, it's a big loss. He's been playing some exceptional football this season. But any other pressing news items you want to touch on?
Well, there are three things. One is, four things actually. One, Callum Watkins has signed a new deal with Leeds to play next season, which reflects how well he's done since joining them from Salford. Sam Walters has signed a long deal with Wigan. 4 years to 2029, which again reflects the fact that he's done very well for them since joining them from Leeds. But there were three major things that I was looking at as potentially big news stories, and one of them got settled quite recently. I wanted to know whether Tyrone May was going to play for Hull, was going to stay with Hull KR. After playing so well alongside Michael Lewis, in their success. And of course he signed a new 2-year deal. I thought he might go to West Tigers, to be honest, to play with Taylor May, who's joined them for the rest of the season. Because he's said for quite a long time that he'd love to play with his brothers, and that looks as though it would be at West Tigers. But fortunately for Hull KR, he's staying for another 2 years. And the other two important decisions that have to be made elsewhere, Lachlan Lamb, will he stay with Lee? Well, it now looks as though nothing's been announced yet to my knowledge, but it now looks as though he is going to stay for at least another year, maybe 2 years. I think, I just wonder whether Lachlan Lamb might be lining up a place in the new NRL side that will play out of Papua New Guinea from 2028. So it would probably suit him if that's his aim, and I don't know for sure that it is, of course, but I could just see the logic in it if it were the case. It would make sense for him to spend another 2 years at Lee before heading back to play for the new PNG team. And the other big news that we're waiting for is whether Brad Arthur will stay with Leeds Rhinos. I mean, he's obviously been knocked back as far as Perth Bears are concerned. So is he going to stay with Leeds, or is he going to return to Australia anyway to be nearer to his family, which obviously he said is a very major thing for him? And obviously from Leeds' point of view, they want him to stay. And the question, if he were to go back, the question is who would be their new coach? And there's no doubt there'd be a lot of speculation on who that might be. But I suspect, and I'm only saying this, I am speaking speculatively, but I suspect that he will stay with Leeds. I think he's enjoyed his time there, and the only thing that I would suggest that Leeds might try and do is sign his two sons, so that Brad wouldn't be separated from them anymore. But that's probably not possible, I wouldn't have thought. But it would be great to see his lads also playing in England, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. He's really, we got a taste of him like when he came in towards the end of last year, and you could just tell he just needed that off season and a pre-season with Leeds before the fans could start to see the results of Brad Arthur, and if he hasn't proven it this year.
Leeds are going really. He's the best coach Leeds have had since Brian McDermott left them in 2017, I think it was, or 2018. But I think he's the best coach they've had since then. And he's brought back a very strong sense of belief into the club, and I think that's been so important.
Oh, definitely, mate. And I'm sure all Leeds Rhinos fans have their fingers and toes crossed that he decides to stay on, because they're playing some great footy at the moment. All right, mate. Well, how about we take a look at this weekend's matchups if you're happy to move on, mate. Tonight, we've got Castleford taking on Hull KR.
Well, Castleford did extremely well against Hull to beat them at the weekend, and now they're playing, the other Hull club, and the task is even tougher. Castleford seem to struggle to put two good performances together, and I suspect that we'll see that tonight. I don't think Castleford will win. I think Hull KR will probably just overwhelm them. And I think they'll probably win by about 14 points. I mean, I hope that it's closer than that, and I'd love to see Castleford rising up the ranks, because I think they play very attractive rugby. I'm a great fan of Danny Maguire. I really think he's a great guy. I'd love to see him being really successful, but I can't quite see them beating Hull KR tonight. Hull KR they scored 68 points against the Catalans last week, and I certainly don't expect anything like that this week, but they'll be too strong, I think, for Cass this evening.
Yes, not really showing many signs of a Challenge Cup hangover.
None whatsoever.
Moving on to tomorrow's matchups, mate. We'll start with St Helens taking on Leeds.
What a great potential clash this is. St Helens, I think they're still in 5th place, but they're now 4 points behind Leeds, who are in 3rd. So if St Helens are going to get into the upper reaches of the playoff positions, they've got to beat Leeds. They'll have to do it, obviously, without Jack Welsby and without one or two other players who are going to be out. They've had a very mixed season so far, but if this was a game, I think St Helens have got to win this game in the same way that Queensland had to win in Perth on Wednesday night. If they're going to really restore, hope and optimism to their supporters, they've got to beat Leeds on Friday night. And whether they will, this is the sort of game that could even go to golden point, Jake. But and of course who knows if they're going to do it? They're not going to have the young George Whitby playing for them, for example, because he's out with a head injury assessment. So I think Leeds might just be able to sneak it, but just not by very much, by a couple of points, possibly even in golden point time. So I think St Helens will just fall short, but I could so easily be proved wrong.
Yeah, and this is one of those games I feel like if Saints can get a win here, when they look back at the end of the season, this might be one of those matches they could have circled and said, this is where it started to turn for us.
Well, I think if you'd been still living in Manchester, mate, we might have sent you to this game to report on it, because I think it's a game you'd have enjoyed watching and reporting on, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Oh, I always enjoyed going out to Totally Wicked Stadium and hearing the vocal Saints fans getting behind their side. It was always a great atmosphere, mate. It's one thing I always tell people over here is like, you think we've got a good atmosphere, go over there and sit in a stadium with 5 to 10,000 others, and you'll feel like you're in a stadium of 20 to 30.
Yeah.
It's something I'll always cherish. Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. The other matchup we have tomorrow night, mate, Wakefield taking on Wigan.
Well, Wakefield just lost narrowly to Leigh at the weekend, and if you lose at home to Leigh, then you would think you would probably lose at home to Wakefield as well, to Wigan as well, rather. I think Wakefield struggled to win many matches at home. They always seem to play better away, and I suspect we'll probably see something similar on Friday night. I can't quite see Wakefield beating Wigan, and Wakefield are just lying outside the top 6 at the moment, and I think they'll continue to. I think Wigan will win by about 10 points. They've probably just got a bit too much class and brilliance for Trinity, but Trinity will give it everything, and they'll play well again, but just maybe not quite have what it takes to beat a great side like Wigan.
Yep. Moving on to Saturday's matchups, mate, we have Warrington taking on Huddersfield.
Well, you can only really see one result here, and Warrington need to win it because they are 4 points outside the top 6. They're coming into a series of games now where, on the face of it, they look to be playing some of the sides near the bottom of the table on successive weeks. So Warrington's position may be a bit misleading at the moment, but they certainly need to win. And Huddersfield actually lost so narrowly to Wigan last weekend with a late Wigan try right in the final second of the game. I mean, it was just heartbreaking for Huddersfield and for their coach, Luke Robinson. It was Jack Farrimond who scored in the corner and just snatched a win after Wigan had been 8 points down going into the final 10 minutes. So Huddersfield are on the improve, but I can't quite see them pulling off a win at Warrington. So Warrington by not a very high margin. I think they'll win by about 6 points.
Yep. The other matchup we have on Saturday, we have Catalans taking on Leigh.
Well, you would think that, Catalans have been so disastrous this last few weeks that, and Leigh are going to be taking about 2,500 people to Perpignan. So I just can't see Catalans beating anybody at the moment. I think they'd struggle against Salford, quite frankly. What's happened to them, goodness only knows, but they seem to have completely lost spirit. They've been widely castigated by pundits and by their own supporters, and they've lost their coach a few weeks ago, Steve McNamara. So what on earth has gone wrong? It's tragic, really, for them. And I can see Leigh winning by about 20 points, to be honest, in Perpignan on Saturday.
Yeah, they've been the great disappointment of this season. Catalans, we keep saying it. You look at that team on paper and you think, how are they struggling, or how are they getting 68 points put on them?
Yeah, well, you don't win games on paper, do you? That's the trouble. If you did,
that's right.
You'd win lots.
Yeah. Moving into Sunday's matchup, mate, we've got Salford taking on Hull FC.
Well, again, I can only see one result here. Salford have lost Sam Stone to Warrington, but they've gained Dan Russell from Warrington on loan. I'm not sure what sort of difference that will make, but they're still struggling, and they've got their winding up order appearance in court scheduled for next Wednesday, I think it is, in a case brought by HMRC for unpaid taxes. Whether that case will be adjourned or not, which some people are suggesting might happen, difficult to predict with any certainty. But the club is just going through hell at the moment, and I can't see any change in their fortunes against Hull. And Hull, I think, Hull are nicely positioned in 6th place in Super League at the moment, and it looks as though we might well have 2 Hull clubs in the playoff this year, which would be terrific for the city of Hull.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see what happens after that Salford hearing. It's just that's the other great disappointment of this year, isn't it? Salford, and I guess for their off-field work rather than their on-field.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody could accuse Salford of playing without spirit, as they can accuse Catalans. But ultimately, when you've not got your team's been ripped apart, you can't win games, can you? That's just the fact of life, I'm afraid.
Yeah, mate, that's for sure. All right, Martyn, anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up today, mate?
No, I think we're all set. It's been a good discussion with you, Jake. It's always as it always is, and a pleasure to see you. We're a bit later this week than we normally are, but that's because we wanted to cover the State of Origin game, and maybe we'll get back to something like normal next week. Who knows?
Yeah, and like we touched on before we hit record today, Martyn, there was heaps of nice interaction, a lot of good comments under our last episode last week. We'd like to hear from all our listeners what they thought of Origin, who they think should be the next knight in Rugby League. Anything we've discussed, feel free to chime in our comments.
Whether Jake Connor should be playing for England against the Aussies.
Exactly right. And if Wellesby's out, who replaces him? And then, who knows, we might be able to read a few of those comments out next week, mate.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Great stuff, mate. Well, good to see you, and keep enjoying the sunshine on the Sunshine Coast.
I will, mate, and hopefully it stays sunny over that side for you, although if you're in drought, you might need a bit of rain soon,
We do. We certainly do. Okay, mate.
See you next week. See you.